Alrighty guys, you know what these are. Vegan pork soup dumplings are an absolute Taiwanese delicacy, and I definitely had them many times for breakfast while I was in Taiwan. And they require a couple of steps to make, but afterwards you're going to get the most delicious dumplings. So here goes. Okay guys, so the simplest way to do this is to break this up into parts. Ingredients are going to be listed down below. So I have a couple of flours, all-purpose and bread flour. You just basically want to mix them all together. And to that, I'm actually going to pour in a little bit over a quarter cup of water, along with some oil. And the water is actually boiling water. And if you guys have seen my boiling water doughs before, it kind of denaturizes the gluten in the flour just a little bit, and you end up with a nice softer dough. So obviously making dough is going to be about feels, so some people are going to require a little bit more water and then some people a little bit less. So you guys can actually do this in a food processor as well. It's going to be a lot easier, but after you get it to this stage like this, simply knead it like I am. Just stretch the dough out and then bring it back. And you want to just knead this for about, I'd say 3 to 4 minutes, up until you get a dough ball that is nice and smooth. So right now this guy needs to rest, so wrap it up, put it into the refrigerator for about an hour or overnight. Okay, so part 2, this is how you're going to get the soup inside the dumpling. So I have some agar that I mixed with some vegan chicken stock, and then obviously some scallions and some ginger. So just cook that all together and melt the agar, and then put it into a container into the refrigerator until it gelatinizes. Meanwhile, part 3, time for the filling. So I'm going to take about 1 scallion and I'm just going to chop it and mince it super thin, because you don't really want to taste big chunks of scallion in your filling. It's kind of is one kind of really smooth thing. So I have a little bit of grated ginger right there, and all of this is going to mix together and really flavor that filling really well. Okay, so this is the meaty part of the filling. So this is what I typically use for my pork substitute for a lot of my dim sum desserts. I put in a little bit of wheat gluten, also a little bit of potato starch, and then a little bit of garbanzo bean flour as well. And I find that that just cuts the gluten so that it is not as hard and it is not as rubbery, because I'm really looking for a soft product here. So this is my next favorite thing, and a lot of these ingredients are going to be linked down below with links to where you can get them. It's pork bouillon powder, and I mix that with a little bit of garlic powder as well because it tastes nice and meaty. And the pork bouillon, it's actually vegan. If you guys can't find that, just simply substitute for a vegetable bouillon cube. And then also finally, for my dry ingredients, I'm going to put in a pinch of white pepper, a pinch of salt, and then just a little bit of sugar to round out all of the flavors. Okay, so now time for the wet ingredients. So I have a little bit of water, a little bit of rice wine. Again, recipe is going to be down below, but the reason that I don't put the wet with the dry immediately is once the gluten touches water, it starts developing, it can start getting hard. So I make sure that everything is mixed separately before I add the wet ingredients. So you guys see it's a little bit of oil there. I have a little bit of sesame oil and soy sauce, and all of this oil also keeps the meaty part of this nice and smooth and tender, and it also disrupts a little bit of the gluten development as well, so that it doesn't again get too chewy and too hard. Already action time, so I'll pour all of that liquid in, and just very so gently, because we have a couple of other ingredients to add, so just make sure that it's like semi-mixed before you add anything else. Okay, so remember this was my agar vegan chicken broth jelly that I put in, and when you cut these, so if you look at normal meat recipes, they'll actually advise you to cut these super small, even mince them so that they blend into the meat. because our meat is made from gluten, it has some starches in it, it tends to absorb up all of the liquid. So what I need you guys to do is to get these chunks as big as possible, but then not too big that you can't wrap them. So you can definitely see, like, you see cubes versus like you cannot mince them at all. Otherwise, all of the starches and whatnot, it's going to start absorbing some of that agar liquid up, and then you're not going to have any soup at all. So right now we're just going to add in the minced ginger and then the minced scallions as well, and then just very gently fold this guy together up until everything is nice and blended. So you can see that right now, I have made this recipe a couple of times and I've had a couple of mistakes. To make this really work, I would say to put it into the freezer actually for about 15 minutes right before you are about to fill the dumplings. I wouldn't keep this in the refrigerator overnight. Again, the agar has a tendency to melt, and then the starches in the fake meat have a tendency to absorb all of that liquid. So step 4, it's time for folding, bringing all of that together. So if you notice, I have some of that filling left up there. That should be in the freezer, okay? That's kind of what I wanted to remind you guys of. So this recipe that I'm putting down makes about 18, and I'm making a smaller amount here. But basically, you want to roll it out into logs and then divide them accordingly. This is a good tip that I learned at the bakery is if you guys are not good at estimating and you don't know if you cut the right amount, simply kind of make an indentation onto the log, and then if it happens to be all evened out, then you can make that final cut. So you just want to roll each piece up into balls because you're going to turn them into flat discs later, and it'll just be a lot easier that way. Okay, so here goes the rolling technique. You basically want to roll it out into a flat disc. Everything is even, I'd say about like 3 inches wide first, and then afterwards take that last ½ an inch and just roll it out so that your edges are going to be a lot thinner than your middle. And this serves a couple of purposes. The edges, it's going to be a lot easier to crimp and fold that way, and then meanwhile your center is going to be thicker so that it can hold in all of that soup and all of that filling better. So before you start, make sure that you line a bamboo steamer with a piece of parchment paper and cut out some holes in it so that the steam can go through. I would say to fill this guy up about with 1 tablespoon of filling, and you see what I'm doing is I'm making actually a very conscious effort to get those little pieces of agar jelly, and if you did put them in the freezer for about 15 minutes, you see that it doesn't affect the actual filling, but the agar jellies actually get nice and hard, so it's a lot easier to work with. Trust me guys, it took a couple of tries for this one. So what I'm doing is folding with one hand, and then with the other hand sometimes I'm using that thumb to stuff the filling in, and there's a very famous restaurant in Taiwan that makes these soup dumplings, and they call for 18 folds. So sometimes I end up with 18, sometimes I end up with 17, but it definitely takes a little bit of work, and just make sure that everything is nice and sealed because you don't want the soup to leak through. So you can see how nice these guys look. Definitely put them into the steamer right away, or if you're going to freeze them now. But if you just leave them out, the agar is going to melt, all the starches in, and that gluten is going to absorb all of that soup, and you're not going to have any, okay? So I'm moving it straight into the steamer, and it's on medium-high, so a pretty healthy heat. And I'm going to say to steam it for about 10 to 12 minutes. Okay, so step 6, I promise this is the last one. So we're making our sauce, and basically I'm cutting ginger into fine slices and then just julienning them and putting them into some of this dark vinegar. So if you don't have it, simply use balsamic, and it's just nice because it's kind of like sour and spicy at the same time. Okay, so these are the finished dumplings. Just like, be very gentle with them because the skin is super soft and you don't want the soup to escape or anything. So definitely eat them nice and fresh. This is really the way to go. So a little bit of pressure here. So usually how you eat this is, this is gonna be piping hot, guys, okay? So be careful because there is that burning liquid on the inside, but you're supposed to poke a hole in and you see that nice broth that is coming out right now. So you're kind of supposed to gently kind of sip that in so that you get some of the sauce. And then afterwards to use some of that vinegar ginger sauce, and you can put in some ginger and then spoon in some of that sauce right into the dumpling. So yeah, how good does that look? I think I had already left it out a little bit too long because I was doing the photographs, but oh my gosh, right when it was piping hot out of the steamer. The wrapper is supposed to be super thin and fragile, and you're just really supposed to poke through and all of that soup comes out. So it's just such an amazing dumpling. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this recipe. It did take a couple of steps, but I think you're going to be really proud of yourself after you finish making it. And remember that you can also freeze them as well, so you can make a little more than you normally do. As usual, if you want to see more recipes like this, remember to hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you guys again next time. Bye!